In a vast desert of digital noise, find your peaceful oasis in the glowing neon of our cinematic storytelling. We offer a place for deep reflection, raw emotion, and the beauty of art. Click subscribe now and find your sanctuary in our world of vivid stories.
Night, my uncle handed me a pen and said, "Sign it or I'll make sure you never see a dime of this family's money." I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I set the pen down on my grandfather's mahogany desk, the same desk he used to let me sit behind when I was 7, pretending to be important. And I walked out of that house for the last time. What he didn't know was that I had already photographed every document in that room 3 hours earlier. Before I tell you exactly how I turned those photographs into a federal fraud case in 96 hours, tell me in the comments. What is the one thing you did for family out of obligation that still haunts you? I read every single one. I didn't drive to the police station. I drove to a 24-hour diner 2 miles from the cemetery where we had buried my grandfather that morning, ordered black coffee I didn't drink, and opened my laptop. My name is Isabel. I'm 31 years old. I'm a contract compliance analyst, which means my entire job is reading the fine print that other people skip, catching the clause buried on page 9 that quietly transfers liability, and making sure that what a document says it does is actually what it does. I am professionally allergic to vague language and convenient omissions. My grandfather, Walter, built a modest but real estate portfolio over 40 years. 3 commercial properties in the Mid-Atlantic region, a warehouse outside Richmond, and a 2-family home in Delaware that had been generating rental income since before I was born. Nothing flashy. He wasn't a wealthy man by any dramatic standard. But he was careful, and careful compounds. He also had 2 children. My mother, who worked as a school nurse, and raised me alone after my father left when I was 4. And my uncle Gordon, who had spent 30 years being the son who showed up to every dinner, volunteered for every errand, and made sure Walter knew, constantly, how much he sacrificed to be present. My mother never competed for that spotlight. She just came when she could, called every Sunday, and sent my grandfather handwritten letters when he got too hard of hearing to talk on the phone. She thought love didn't need a performance. She was right about love. She was wrong about how inheritance works when one person has been quietly rewriting the rules for a decade. When my grandfather died, he was 83, sharp, until the last 6 months, when a series of small strokes made him confused about time. He thought it was still the 90s sometimes. He called me by my mother's name twice. His lawyer, a man named Philip, who had handled his affairs for 20 years, told our family that the estate was straightforward. The properties would be split evenly between his 2 children. My mother and Gordon, equal shares. Gordon cried at the funeral, long, visible sobs. He gripped my shoulder during the burial and told me Walter was the only man who ever truly understood him. I nodded and said nothing. I was watching his wife, Renee, standing a few feet away, typing something on her phone. The reading of the will was scheduled for 4 days after the funeral. But Gordon called my mother the night before and asked if she could come to the house first. He said there were some personal items to go through. Sentimental things. He thought it would be easier to do it as a family before the formal meeting. My mother asked if I would come with her. She said she didn't want to be alone in that house without me. I said yes. I almost said no. If I had said no, I would not be telling you this story, because I would never have seen what I saw in that office. When we arrived, Gordon was already in my grandfather's study. He had folders laid out on the desk. He looked organized, in the way that someone looks organized when they have been rehearsing. He offered us coffee. He made small talk about the flowers at the service. He told my mother she looked tired and that grief was hard on the body. Then he slid a document across the desk. He said Walter had revised his estate plan 18 months ago. He said the revised plan reflected Walter's wishes that the properties be transferred to Gordon's management company, which would then pay my mother a structured disbursement over 10 years rather than an outright ownership stake. He said Walter felt this was more practical given that my mother had no experience managing commercial real estate. My mother looked at the document. She looked at Gordon. She looked at me. I looked at the document. I am a compliance analyst. I read the date of the revision. I read the notarization. I read the name of the notary. Then I looked at the signature block at the bottom of the last page. My grandfather's signature had a very specific quality. He had arthritis in his right hand from the age of 75. His signature in his later years had a slight drag on the W, a hesitation before the second stroke, and a tail on the final letter that always curled upward slightly to the right. I had watched him sign my birthday cards for years. I had watched him sign documents at the kitchen table when I helped him with his taxes 2 years ago. The signature on this document was clean, fluid, no drag, no hesitation. The tail on the final letter went left. I didn't say anything. I asked if I could take a moment to read through it carefully. Gordon said, "Of course." He leaned back in the chair and crossed his arms and looked at my mother with an expression that was performing patience. I took photos, 16 of them, every page, every signature block, the notarization stamp, the date. Then I set the pen down and said I wasn't comfortable signing anything today and that we would follow up after the formal meeting with Philip tomorrow. Gordon's face did something complicated. He said the formal meeting was just a formality and that this was the real document that reflected Walter's actual wishes. I said I understood and that I was sure Philip would be happy to confirm that, and I picked up my bag and walked out with my mother. In the car, my mother asked me what was wrong. I told her I needed to make a call. The person I called was a woman named Dr. Adiza Okonkwo, a forensic document examiner I had worked with on a contract dispute 2 years earlier. I texted her the photos at 11 at night and told her I needed an expert opinion on a signature comparison as quickly as she could manage. She texted back in 20 minutes. She said the signature on the document showed none of the motor control variation consistent with the signatory's documented hand tremor. She said it was her professional opinion, pending formal examination of the original, that the signature was likely not authentic. I sat in my dark apartment with that text on my phone for a long time. Then I opened my laptop and started working. I didn't need to break into anything. I just needed to use what I already had access to. My grandfather had given me his online portal credentials 2 years ago when I was helping him organize his finances. He trusted me because I was the one who showed up with a legal pad and helped him understand what he owned, not the one who showed up with a casserole and a sad face. The portal still worked. I navigated to the document management section. My grandfather had a habit of scanning and uploading every significant paper he signed. He was old-fashioned about record-keeping in the physical sense, but his lawyer's office had spent 2 years converting his files to digital, and Walter had kept copies of everything in his own account as well. The original will was there, dated 11 years ago. It said exactly what Philip had told us: equal division between the 2 children. There was no amended version in his own files. The document Gordon had presented was not only forged, it had never existed in any official record until Gordon needed it to. I kept digging. The management company Gordon had referenced in the document was a limited liability company registered in Virginia. I looked up the registration. It had been formed 14 months ago, 7 months after my grandfather's first stroke. I looked at the registered agent, Gordon's wife, Renee, the same Renee who had been typing on her phone at the funeral. I pulled up the deed transfer history for each of the 3 commercial properties. 2 of them had been quietly transferred to the LLC already, not through the estate, through what appeared to be a power of attorney document that I had never seen and that my mother had certainly never been told about. I checked the date the power of attorney had been filed. It was dated during the period when my grandfather's strokes had been most severe, when his own doctor had documented in writing that his decision-making capacity was significantly impaired. I felt something settle in my chest, not rage, not grief, something colder than either of those things. I had worked in compliance long enough to know what this was. This wasn't a family disagreement about who loved Walter more. This wasn't a matter of Gordon feeling entitled and overreaching. This was elder financial abuse. This was fraud. This was a crime. My phone rang at midnight. It was my mother. She said Gordon had just called her and told her she needed to come back to sign the documents first thing in the morning, before the meeting with Philip, because Philip was going to be presenting the same revised plan and it would be better if she didn't make things awkward in a formal setting. I listened to her voice. She sounded small. She sounded the way she sounded when I was 12 and we couldn't pay the electric bill, and she didn't want me to know. Like she was trying to absorb something large enough to crush her without letting it show. He was calling her at midnight, the day after she buried her father, pressuring her to sign before she could talk to the lawyer. This is the thing about people who do what Gordon did. They are not stupid. They are strategic. But strategy without ethics eventually becomes lazy because it always works. Gordon had spent 30 years being the golden son. He had never once been questioned. He had never faced a consequence for anything. He had gotten so comfortable with the transaction, presents for inheritance, care performance for profit, that he had started to believe his own story. He thought my mother was too sad to read carefully. He thought I was just there to hold her hand. He had not calculated for the contract compliance analyst with a forensic document examiner on speed dial. I told my mother not to sign anything. I told her to go to the meeting with Philip, say nothing about Gordon's document, and let me handle the next 48 hours. She asked me what I was going to do. I told her I was going to do my job. I called Dr. Okonkwo back and asked her to prepare a formal written opinion. She said she needed to see the original, but that based on the high-resolution photographs, she was confident in her preliminary assessment. I told her I would get the original to her as soon as legally possible. Then I made the second call. An attorney I had met through work, a woman named Sandra Chen, who specialized in estate litigation and elder law. I texted her the condensed version at 12:30 in the morning. She called me back in 15 minutes. She was not happy to be awake, and she was furious about what she was reading. Sandra said we needed to move before Gordon could complete any additional transfers. She said the power of attorney used during a period of documented incapacity was potentially void and that the deed transfers executed under it could be unwound. She said the forged will amendment, if Dr. Seftine Okonkwo's assessment held up, was not just a civil matter. She said, forge a will, file it as part of an estate proceeding, and you have just committed a felony in every jurisdiction in this country. She said she would contact the county probate court first thing in the morning to flag the proceedings and request a hold. She said I needed to file a formal complaint with the state attorney general's elder abuse unit. She said she would walk me through everything. I stayed up until 4 in the morning building the file, time-stamped transaction records, property deed history, LLC registration documents, the original will versus the forged amendment, Dr. Okonkwo's preliminary opinion, the power of attorney filing date cross-referenced against my grandfather's medical records, which my mother had full access to as next of kin. By the time I closed my laptop, it wasn't a complaint. It was a case. The meeting with Philip the next morning was the strangest professional experience of my life. I sat across from Gordon in a conference room with a water view and watched him perform grief and reasonable family member energy while I knew exactly what was in the file on Sandra's desk. Gordon tried once more to present the revised document. Philip looked at it and frowned and said he had never seen it before and that it did not match any version in his records. Gordon said Walter must have used a separate attorney. Philip said that was unusual. Gordon said Walter had wanted it handled privately. I watched Gordon's wife reach under the table and touch his arm. Philip said he would need to verify the document before proceeding. He said the estate proceedings would be paused pending review. Gordon looked at me across the table, just for a second, and I looked back. I didn't say a word. He knew. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his hand went flat on the folder in front of him. He knew I had not come to that meeting as my mother's support person. He had just realized too late that I had come as something else entirely. 2 weeks later, the state attorney general's office confirmed they had opened a formal investigation. The forensic examination of the original document confirmed Dr. Okonkwo's assessment. The power of attorney was challenged in probate court and suspended pending the investigation. The 2 deed transfers that had already been completed were frozen by court order. Gordon called my mother 4 times in that period. She did not answer. I had advised her not to, and Sandra had formally notified Gordon's attorney that all communication should go through counsel. My mother asked me once if we were doing the right thing. I told her that Walter had spent 40 years being careful so that she would have something, that someone taking that from her was not a family disagreement. It was a theft, and we were not doing the right thing. We were doing the legal and necessary thing, which occasionally happened to be the same. The criminal charges came 8 weeks after the funeral. Forgery, filing of fraudulent legal document, elder financial exploitation, wire fraud related to the property transfers. Gordon and Renee were both named. Renee, as the registered agent of the LLC, used to receive the transfers. I was at work when my phone buzzed with Sandra's message. I read it twice. I put my phone face down on my desk. I finished the contract review I was in the middle of because the deadline was real and the work still needed doing. That evening, I drove to my mother's apartment. She had made dinner. We ate at her small kitchen table. The one with the wobble on the left leg she had never gotten around to fixing. She didn't ask me much about the legal details. She asked me if I was okay. She asked me if I was okay. She asked me if I had been sleeping. She told me I looked thin. I thought about the version of this story where I didn't go to that house, where I let my mother walk into that meeting alone the next morning, where she signed a document with a forged signature and spent a decade receiving structured disbursements from her brother for property that was supposed to be equally hers. I thought about the 30 years Gordon had spent performing devotion while building a plan to take everything the moment Walter couldn't protect himself anymore. And then I thought about my grandfather at his desk, letting a 7-year-old pretend to be important. The way he kept every document, the way he trusted me with his passwords because he said I was the one who actually read things. He was right. I read things. On the drive home, I passed the diner where I had sat with cold coffee the night this all began. The lights were still on. A woman at the counter was reading something on her phone. The cook was visible through the window, moving around the kitchen. Life. Going on. Normal and relentless. I thought about what revenge used to mean to me. The hot, dramatic version where you confront someone and they crumble and admit everything and you feel large and righteous. That's not what this was. This was documentation and phone calls and staying up too late and knowing which expert to contact and doing the unglamorous parts without skipping them because the unglamorous parts are the ones that actually hold. My grandfather left my mother something because he worked for 40 years to do it. Gordon tried to take it because he believed the proximity was the same as deserving. Those are not the same thing. And eventually, the document record reflects that. I parked in front of my building, checked my email, responded to 2 work messages, sent a reminder to myself for a deadline the following Tuesday. Then I went inside and went to sleep. If you have ever been the person in the room who actually reads the fine print, the one who gets called difficult for asking questions, drop reader in the comments. And if someone in your life is getting older and you're not sure who's managing their paperwork, go check. Not because you're suspicious, because love sometimes looks like asking uncomfortable questions before it's too late to ask them at all. People ask me sometimes if I feel guilty. If turning in your own family, blood, however poisoned, leaves a mark you can't wash off. I thought about it honestly. The way you think about things at 2 a.m. when the work is done and the apartment is quiet. And the answer I keep arriving at is this. Guilt requires that you did something wrong. I didn't. Gordon did. And the thing about choices is that they have weight. And that weight goes somewhere. It doesn't disappear because you're family. It doesn't dissolve because you cried at the funeral. My grandfather spent 40 years being careful, not flashy, not lucky, careful. He kept every receipt, scanned every document, trusted the people who showed up, and actually read things. That's not a small thing. That's a kind of integrity that runs quietly in the background of a person's whole life. Barely visible, never announced. He didn't build what he built so that one of his children could dismantle it during the 6 months he couldn't protect himself. He built it precisely because he believed that what you leave behind matters, that the people you love deserve to receive what you intended for them, not what someone else decided they deserved. Gordon believed that proximity was the same as deserving. 30 years of Sunday dinners, 30 years of being present and visible and performing the role of devoted son. He had confused the performance with the reality so completely that he genuinely seemed to believe the inheritance was already his. That is what happens when a person substitutes strategy for actual love for long enough. Eventually, they can't tell the difference anymore. They stop asking what's right. They only ask what they can get away with. He almost got away with it. If my mother had walked into that meeting alone, if I hadn't looked at that signature, if I didn't happen to know what my grandfather's handwriting looked like under arthritis pressure after years of watching him sign birthday cards. Those are uncomfortable near misses to sit with. Because the system doesn't save you automatically. You have to show up. You have to read the fine print. You have to be willing to ask the uncomfortable question out loud, even when everyone in the room wants you to stay quiet. That's the part nobody talks about when they tell these kinds of stories. The courage required is not dramatic. It's not a confrontation in a parking lot or a speech in a courtroom. It's quieter and harder than that. It's deciding at midnight, tired and sad and still wearing the clothes you wore to your grandfather's burial, to open your laptop instead of going to sleep. It's sending a text to someone who can help. Instead of convincing yourself you must be misreading things, it's trusting your own competence when every social pressure in the room is telling you to defer, to be gracious, to not make this harder than it already is. Intelligence without action is just awareness of your own defeat. Integrity without follow-through is just a self-image. What I learned from this, from Walter, really, from the way he lived, is that the most powerful thing you can do for the people you love is to be competent and to show up and to not look away when something is wrong. even when looking away would be so much easier. My grandfather left me his portal credentials because he said I was the one who actually read things. I hope wherever he is, I did right by that trust.